Hey everybody. So on this episode of Books and Battlefields, I'm going to be doing something a little different today. Um, I want to talk about a few campaigns during different wars that are similar. They mirror each other. Um, Almost had the same goals, and uh, the reasons that they failed. Um, So the the wars I want to talk about are the 7 Years' War, or as what we know, the French and Indian War, the American Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812. And this all falls in the category of the Lake Champlain Hudson Valley corridor. Um, in the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War as it's known to most, the French and the British understood the importance of the Champlain Hudson Valley um, in New York. Lake Champlain was a main waterway, and um, as well as the Hudson. And there is a very small gap between the two. Back in the day, waterways were our highways. So there's a small gap between the two highways, as you'd want to say, or the waterways. This is also where Lake George comes into place at Fort William Henry. Um, so the British built Fort William Henry to defend Fort, what was it, Edward? Yeah, I believe it was Fort Edward, which sits at the time the very northern curve of the Hudson closest to Lake George. And then Fort William Henry was built right there at the southern end of Lake George. Now, the French, they built Fort Carillon, which would later become Ticonderoga, to help defend their way to um, Canada, which was a French colony at the time. So when war broke out, that's when they were built. But the British and the French would do their darnest to control that corridor, with Montcalm defending Fort Carillon, and the British, I can't necessarily remember his name, but eventually General Howe's brother was killed at Fort Carillon. Um, so Howe will be killed at Fort Carillon, and eventually, um, the fight would be taken to Quebec in Canada, and the British will win the war. So the campaign was always to fight and uh, what's the word? To fight and just to control that Champlain Hudson Valley. And since at the time um, France was at war with England, or the UK or Britain, and um, the British didn't control Canadian territory and Quebec and all that other stuff. Uh, the British had to invade Canada and whatnot, and they won. They won that finally, and eventually um, won the war subsequently. Both Montcalm and Wolfe will be killed um, after the Battle of Plains of Abraham, with that ending the war pretty much, and the French signing over and letting the British control Quebec, Canada, the Quebecois, and the territory of Canada that the French owned and controlled. Um, that whole campaign stuff was right through there in that corridor, the Lake Champlain and Hudson corridor. Now, if you're familiar with the American Revolutionary War, after the British in the 7 Years' War won victory over Fort Carillon, they renamed Fort Carillon Fort Ticonderoga, and the Americans and the colonists understood its importance because, one, the British control Canada up north, and uh, there's also a smaller fort, a little northern tip of that same bit of land called Crown Point. Uh, so what happened was, after the outset of the Revolutionary War, again, the Americans knew the importance of the Lake Champlain and the Hudson Valley. So Benedict Arnold and the Green Mountain Boys, can't remember his name, slips my tongue, it escapes me of what his name was, of who was part of that attack at Fort Ticonderoga. My apologies, I should know. But they understood the tactical necessity of holding Fort Ticonderoga. But at the time of the outbreak of the war, it was controlled by the British. So they attacked at night, won easily, and throughout the war, there would be times where Ticonderoga would come under attack. But the main campaign to take over and control that valley was the Saratoga campaign by Burgoyne. And Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold would be the ones to save uh, the Hudson Valley, Champlain Valley corridor from not only cutting off the New England states from the rest of the colonies. You also had complete control over being able to move troops and uh, goods and supplies from Canada. So thankfully, at the Battle of Saratoga and all the surrounding places where the battles took place, and you had Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates and the brave Continentals winning that battle. Um, America would be saved. The head would have been cut off had they not won that battle. And we're also lucky that I believe it was Clinton or Howe, I believe it was Howe, decided to go from New York City up into the Chesapeake Bay and attack at Brandywine because of something else. He wanted to take over the capital of Philadelphia. You also had a force coming from Niagara and Fort Stanwix in New York on the Mohawk River, I believe, held off the British there, and they went back and retreated. That was all part of the campaign, but the Americans ultimately um, held off, and uh, the French then would join the war effort and help us win and stuff like that. Now, the last one, which had similar of all of them, we had the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. Try to control the valley, because that's just the whole campaign itself. Try to win it over. That was a longer campaign. The campaign of Saratoga was won by the Americans, and now the last one is the invasion of the Champlain Valley to control it, and again to cut off um, the New England states, even though at the time, actually, New England wasn't quite for the War of 1812, but the British Canadians wanted to redo the Saratoga campaign in a sense, though, but they wanted to add a flotilla or a navy aspect involved. So the British Canadians sent down a force of roughly like 10,000 troops. And this was the largest invasion of North America than the United States uh, in the entire war. I learned this from, um, what's his name? Hercolo. Um, and he told me and taught me that Plattsburgh was pretty much um, the largest invasion. Now, um, I said Plattsburgh. That's because Plattsburgh was a port, pretty much at the sense. During the War of 1812, it was able to produce some ships, stuff like that, and um, so the 10,000 British troops wanted to secure Plattsburgh, stop them from subsequently building ships, and they wanted to send the Navy down through Lake Champlain. So there was a Navy built in Canada right on Champlain, because it was harder to transport ships and everything on the St. Lawrence into the river that flows into Lake Champlain. But they built along one of the islands and pretty much rushed it. Now, I can't recall the Commodore or the Admiral of the British, but I know the guy in charge of the American side was Macdonough. Now, I also can't remember who was, I think it was Brown, who was in charge of the troops on the ground in Plattsburgh. But nonetheless, Vermont and New Hampshire militia came over across Lake Champlain. It was like a reverse Dunkirk, as uh, Hercolo said, um, coming across Lake Champlain, and maybe it wasn't Hercolo. It was probably in a video I saw. But anyway, the Vermonters and New Hampshire militia came across Lake Champlain to help defend the city, to defend the town, village, whatever, from the British and Canadians. And disaster struck the British because, uh, yes, the Americans were able to hold off, kind of. They got pushed off, kind of defending home turf, and they were able to um, pretty much keep the British at bay, but they were still overwhelmed. This is a force of 10,000 soldiers. It's the British Army. The saving grace for that was that they were not necessarily the uh, um, happy. These men just got done fighting Napoleon, and they were hoping to just go home, but the Napoleonic War finally ended, and Britain sent over uh, troops to end the war over in America. So these guys weren't happy, but they they did their job. These soldiers, you know, did what they were told. So you had Vermont militia, you had New York militia, you had all these militiamen and regulars um, fighting against the British to hold them off and save Plattsburgh. There isn't much left of the Battle of Plattsburgh today, sadly. It's not as bad as, you know, the Battle of White Plains fields, where there's uh, construction and everything and whatnot. But some of the earthworks, some of the forts have definitely eroded away at Plattsburgh. But anyway, MacDonough set up his couple ships, fired a few broadsides. Like this is me summarizing it. And after the Royal Navy came up and around the peninsula head of, and came into the bay of where Plattsburgh is on Lake Champlain, and I think it was like within, if I remember correctly, I read it. It took maybe 45 minutes, not even, because it took 45 minutes, not even, to kill the British naval commander at the time. At that point, he was killed in a broadside attack or something of the sort, but he was killed, and the British um, the the British man in charge, the British officer in charge on the ground, it was going to be a joint effort. So once he saw the British ships pretty much getting annihilated, he pretty much called it off and left and retreated. Wasn't much fighting after that, um, but that was the reason why that one failed, because the British planned this attack and this campaign to take over the Champlain Valley and take over to Hudson Valley, but they failed miserably right away. So they couldn't even mirror Burgoyne's attack for the Saratoga campaign, and they couldn't even do what they did when uh, you know the French and the British came down and attacked and went up and attacked and whatnot. They weren't able to achieve it both times. Now, two wars, the Americans held the British off. Yes, Fort Ticonderoga did get lost in 1777, but in October 1777, the Americans prevailed and held them off in Saratoga, which is a lot further south, actually, in New York. But nonetheless, Americans got together, came together, fought off the common enemy, won the battle. MacDonough has a um, monument up there in Plattsburgh you can go in and climb. It was closed when I went, and it was miserable raining at that time. Um, but it looks like you can climb it. It's almost like a very small version of like the George Washington Memorial down in D.C. But yeah, those are the three campaigns that are similar. One of the most similar campaigns, 3 year three campaigns, 3 wars in a row, stuff like that. Major wars. Um, so, um, but if you ever want to know any books of the sort to read, I'm sitting here near my Revolutionary War, 7 Years' War, and War of 1812 books. Um, The books I do recommend are, let's see, Relief is Greatly Wanted, The Battle of Fort William Henry by Edward J. Dodge. That gave me some really good insight. The Quebec 1759, The Siege and Battle. And even for the 7 Years' War with that one, other book I recommend that's here is, now the Quebec 1759 is by C.P. Stacy. This one here is Fort Ticonderoga, A Key to a Continent by Edward P. Hamilton. That's a book I highly recommend. And that covers both 7 Years' War and Revolutionary War, because it does talk about the history of Fort Ticonderoga itself. Now, the other one I recommend is for the War of 1812, because it won't tell you this in the Revolutionary War books, because why would it? It's Revolutionary War, not War of 1812. But the one I recommend is And All Their Glory Pass. Fort Erie, Plattsburgh, and the Final Battles in the North, 1814. It's by Donald E. Graves. This was recommended to me by um, the folks up at the Niagara Falls Museum in Canada when I just started dipping into the War of 1812. Now, I haven't read it yet, but I can only imagine how good it will be, because I want to get back up there. But The Battles at Plattsburgh by Keith A. Hercalo, a foreword by Donald E. Graves. That actually gives better insight into the actual battle itself. Now, those are the books I recommend for those three wars. Because Fort William Henry was a pivotal fort during the 7 Years' War, especially during that campaign. Fort Ticonderoga, also, as Fort Carillon in the 7 Years' War, American Revolutionary War. You don't see Fort Ticonderoga in War of 1812 because it falls into disrepair and it doesn't get what do you call it? It doesn't get necessarily saved, but it gets refixed, it doesn't get cleaned up and spruced up like it is now. And a lot of care and time went into getting the fort back to almost what it looked like at the time. Fort William Henry is no longer there, the original one. Fort William Henry is rebuilt, but it's up to spec, thanks to, what did they tell me? Thanks to the plans and the blueprints of the fort from uh, England, the UK. They still had the plans up there for it over in the UK, so they were able to build it. And for Plattsburgh, some of the stuff is there, but some of it's not. But there's a lot of clear markers, even though a lot of it's faded and built over with you know construction, stuff like that. People building on it. Um, there's still some markers there that you can look out to and see. Oh, okay, this happened there. The famous painting of Plattsburgh, that those grounds are still preserved. There's some battle damage there from the battle, especially in some houses. There's some houses that have some cannonballs, stuff like that. I haven't been to Saratoga yet, but yeah, Saratoga is in my plans. 250th is coming up, but those are the three campaigns that are very similar to one another that I want to not necessarily address, but to bring light and share some books that you can read about them and what transpired. Um, Spoilers clearly in this episode, but yeah. Um, that's pretty much it. So, uh, if you enjoyed this video, if you'd like to, see more videos like this, because I do read a lot of books, and I have had a couple light bulbs go off with, that's very similar to that and whatnot. Uh, Let me know, because I do plan on doing this, but continuing this kind of series, and like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification button, and yeah, I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.